How do you know I love you? Because I'm out here in 102-degree heat shooting this video for outdoor food photography. Of course, I could have filmed this like 3 weeks ago when the weather was nice, but you know, here we are. What's shakin' bacon? I'm Joni Simon. Welcome to my studio. This is where I do food photography. So if you are into that, you go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And today we're taking the party outdoors because I've heard from a ton of people here on YouTube in the comments as well as over on Instagram wanting more information about how to shoot food outdoors because it is an unpredictable scenario. You've got the sun is moving, you've got all sorts of environmental factors. So what I want to do is take you outside and show you some examples of how I shoot food outdoors. What are some of the strategies I use so that we can get those really delicious food shots no matter what the situation. So if that sounds good to you, you stick around. So I think we can all agree that one of the most important tools for your business as a photographer is a beautiful online website to showcase your portfolio. And so if you've not gotten around to doing that yet, you definitely need to go check out Portfolio Box. Portfolio Box is an online website builder for photographers, designers, artists, and other creative professionals. If you need to set up an online portfolio, you can be up and running in just a matter of hours with a sleek, professional, eye-catching website used by over 740,000 creatives worldwide. And the best part is that Portfolio Box is user-friendly and doesn't require any coding knowledge. They've also got a newly designed admin panel that makes setting up your online portfolio a cinch. Their free plan includes hosting of 50 images, 10 products, 10 pages, and all of their amazing template designs, plus 53 brand new designs that they just added. So to try it out, go to the link in the description box below, which also gets you a special Bite Shot discount of 20% off their pro version through December 31st, 2018. So the number one thing that I want to make sure you keep in mind through this entire tutorial, and I mean as a photographer in general, is being able to train your eye to look at a scene that you've got set up and understand how is the light falling, which direction is the light falling in, where are the shadows falling, and how are those two interacting with one another in order to create an effective image. And as we've talked about before in the natural lighting video indoors, is that you want to make sure that your light is coming in either from the side or from behind, not from the front, because that's going to create a really flat image because we're knocking out all of the shadows, right? That a really effective image has a range of highlights to shadows and that those two are creating contrast in an image. It's going to make it feel more three-dimensional, more dynamic. And so the same thing applies when we are outdoors. You want to make sure you have a good range of tones, that we've got highlights, that we've got shadows, and that if we're missing those things, then that's how we're going to utilize these different tools in order to modify and change that light and those shadows to create a more dynamic image. So one of the very first things I think about when I'm attacking an outdoor shoot is understanding what time of day are we doing this shoot at and how is that going to impact the image. That if I'm really going for soft, even lighting without having to have a ton of gear and equipment, that I want something that's kind of easier to shoot, a great time to do that is during golden hour, which you might have heard of this before. It's something portrait photographers really love. It's that hour right around sunrise as well as that hour right before sunset. That's when the sun is lower in the sky, and so you are getting a lot less direct impact from the sun. It's a bit more diffused, it's softer, you're going to get softer shadows. It's not going to be that harsh line. It's also going to be, in terms of the color temperature, it's going to be a lot redder and a lot warmer. So you do want to make sure that you are paying attention to your white balance, or doing as I always recommend and shooting in RAW. It's going to make it a lot easier in post because that sun is, in the course of that hour, going to change. You know that if you set up, say that sunset is at 7 p.m. and so you are ready to start shooting at 6 and you start shooting from 6 to 7, the color temperature is going to change throughout the course of that. So just shooting in RAW is going to make your life a little bit easier in terms of color correction in the post-processing. So as far as the setup goes during golden hour, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you don't want the sun to be directly behind you as you're shooting the food, because what's going to happen is that it's going to completely illuminate the front of the food and it's going to read really flat because you're not going to get any shadows. So the better way to go about it is to make sure that the setting sun is either to your right or to your left so that it's creating highlights on one side, shadows on the other, Or you can shoot with the sun setting behind the food, although you do want to be careful with this because it can cause a haze. Because depending on the position of the sun, you might be capturing some of its rays kind of directly into the lens, which is then causing this sort of hazy feel, which stylistically might be what you're going for. It can look really cool sometimes, very artistic. But if you don't want that haze, then what you want to do is just adjust your camera either to the right or to the left or up or down, some sort of other position so as to knock that out, or just wait a couple minutes because the sun will continue to set. But now, of course, we don't always have the luxury of shooting during golden hour because we might be shooting for a client, and specifically a restaurant, because the best time to shoot at a restaurant is between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, especially if it's like a lunch dinner kind of place, because things are quiet, the restaurant's not busy, but the kitchen's all set up, the food is ready to rock. So it's a great time to do a photo shoot at a restaurant, but sometimes you might end up having to shoot outdoors for whatever reason. This actually literally happened to me like 6 weeks ago. And so in that situation, the sun is nearly directly overhead. You know, we're past noon, so it's not exactly overhead, but it's still pretty intense in terms of if you went outside and you looked at the ground, the shadows that would be cast, like if you just looked at your own shadow, it would not be soft around the edges. It would be really hard. Now, if that's the style you're going for, then that is a perfect time to start shooting. But if you're like me and you want something more evenly lit, a little bit softer, what I think to be a bit more flattering for the food, especially for a client's purposes, then what you're going to want to do is modify that light. And so the very first thing that I will look for is some shade. But I will tell you, not all shade is created equal, because there was actually a prime example was early on in my photography. I was shooting at a restaurant. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the restaurant itself was really dark. And this was before I was shooting artificial light. So I had to use natural light, and they had a great patio. And I thought, oh, perfect, we'll just shoot on the patio. Well, all was fine and good until the sun kind of crept up over the awning that was over top of the patio, which had kind of a red color to it, and it was just transparent enough that the sunshine then came through that awning and came into the scene and created a pink cast across all of the dishes. And so when I went into editing, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awful. And so no amount of color correction could really make those images perfect, which there's no such thing as a perfect image, so that's a whole other conversation. But regardless, it's gonna make your life a lot easier, especially for editing, if you're really paying attention. Are there any awnings? Is there any funny color contrast? Maybe is there a big old orange wall off over to the side where the sun is reflecting off of that and bouncing back onto your scene? So whenever you're in the shade, or really again, anytime you're shooting anywhere, just understand what are your surroundings and how is the light maybe playing off of those in order to actually impact your scene. But outside of some sort of wild colored awnings or crazy colored walls, otherwise you should be pretty good. But the thing to, again, pay attention to is where is the main source of light then entering into that shady place? You know, do you have a very marked place where the light is coming from and where the shadows are being cast? But sometimes when you are shooting in the shade, what's going to happen is you're going to really lose the highlights, and again, it's going to create a really flat image because everything's kind of shadowy. So in that case, then what we do is we bust out our reflector. And so typically what you'll see is those diffusers that I've recommended before, I'll link those down below, also come with a reflector kit that's a really nice metallic-y sort of surface. What that's going to do is that's going to cast some highlights. So again, we're getting back into the world of having highlights and shadows, that if you find that you need additional highlights, you need to add some light to the situation, create some more contrast, that you've got the tools to do it. But now, of course, there is the inevitable final question of, well, what happens, Joni, if I'm shooting in broad daylight, like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and there is no shade to be found? Which hopefully this doesn't happen a whole lot, unless your style is that really intense, like hard shadow look, which is very cool and very in right now, in which case then you're perfect and you just rock and roll. But if you are me and you want something that's a little bit more even, a little bit softer, then really your only resource at that point is a diffuser. And of course, you know me, I love my diffuser. I use it every single day for artificial lighting, for natural lighting in the studio, for, I mean, any sort of situation. So you take that outside and you position that between your food and the sun. Now, if your sun is directly dead set overhead, then I would say wait like 20 minutes so that it just passes, so that at least you get some sort of angle, because again, it's going to have an impact on the direction of the light on the food and where the shadow's being cast, where the highlight's being cast. And so what I typically like to do is hopefully the sun is no longer right in the center, it's off to one of the sides, and then I position the diffuser, and then I have the food right next to that. So then I'm getting that nice, softer, diffused light on the food. But as the sun moves, that diffuser might need to move, because again, back to the situation where I was at a restaurant shoot and had to shoot outdoors. Well, it was great because starting at 2, there was a shadow coming from the building that was able to kind of block things, and I was able to shoot from that angle. Well, as the sun continued to move, suddenly that shade was gone and I was literally again in broad daylight. So that's when then I started to move the diffuser. So just know, if you are going to be shooting for more than maybe an hour outdoors, that you are probably going to have to continue to change that setup, the positioning of a diffuser, the positioning of a reflector. Those things are going to move and change as the sun moves and changes. So that's again why it is so critically important that you are paying attention to your scene and really looking at where are the shadows falling, where are the highlights falling. I'm sorry, I sound like a broken record at this point, but it is beyond important. This is what the whole game is about. So hopefully you picked up a trick or two. You've got some new ideas, some inspiration for the next time you are shooting outside. And certainly if you do, you can tag me over on Instagram. I am at The Bite Shot, and I always love to see your work. So with that, I hope you have a fantastic day. I hope you have fun shooting outdoors. And with that, I'll see you soon. Bye. Okay, so one more thing that I completely forgot to mention, and it's not my fault. It's because I live in Phoenix, where 299 days out of 365 per year are sunny. We don't really have clouds. Clouds are not a normal thing around here. We get really super excited when it rains. Like, you've never seen people so enthusiastic before. But what happens is that anytime you have clouds, clouds are a natural diffuser. So it's actually a really great scenario to shoot food or portraits or really anything. Now, of course, rain would be challenging, but just cloudy skies, those are natural diffusers. Those are fantastic. So I guarantee that if there's a cloud in the sky and it is covering the sun, for sure, I am outside shooting.